I used to wrestle.
Did you? Well, we'll ask you about that. But this is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube, and today I have a guest that is an unusual guest for this channel. We do cover UFOs. This is more of a consciousness chat, but he's also an award-winning filmmaker, screenwriter, and producer. Has done a lot in Hollywood and is now involved in metaphysical exploration. And he's going to be appearing at Contact in the Desert. Richard Martini in his office, full of cool musical instruments.
Musical instruments. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Rich Martini, live from Santa Monica, California. How's it going, Devin?
Good. The best hospital I've ever been to was in Santa Monica. So you're lucky to be living there if you ever run into issues.
Which one? Were you at UCLA Hospital or St. John's?
Must have been UCLA, I think. But they had VIP parking and valet parking, and they took me in right away, and I was treated like a star. Where I'm actually from Canada, where our medical system is horrible. So it was a nice change.
Well, let's put it this way. I do remember that Mike Moore movie where a guy had to decide which hand he was going to keep because he was in the United States, and the guy had the identical operation in Canada. It took a little longer, but he got to keep both of them. Anyway, it's funny. My wife just texted me 2 minutes ago. She's at UCLA Hospital at the cafeteria because the food is so good. We like to go there. It's like another restaurant we go to, and we've gotten to know the servers, and both our kids were born there. But I know what you're talking about. But it is funny that you mentioned that hospital because I literally my wife just said I'm having lunch at the hospital.
How do you like LA, by the way, just to digress into that for a bit, because there's a lot of controversy now, a lot of people moving out of LA. You've been there a while. What's your opinion?
No, I've been here a while, Devin. And it's funny. I have my relatives lived in Niagara Falls, and so I used to spend quite a few summers in Canada, mostly collecting firecrackers and figuring out how to get that into. Do I still have you? Did I lose you?
Yeah, I just take myself out of the screen when the guests.
Okay. Well, I like seeing you. That's fine. Then I can see you laughing or not.
Okay.
Or give me a
sure. No, I'll leave it in there. I'm not as pretty as you.
Oh, please. You're younger. Let's put it that way. But no, I appreciate seeing you because then I feel like I'm not talking to myself, which I do most of the day anyway. No, growing up in Chicago. So Chicago people are.
Yeah.
I heard a comedian last night saying people in Chicago think it's the greatest city in the world. They even named their soccer team after the worst disaster in Chicago, the Chicago Fire. No, but I came out to LA. I don't know. I flipped a coin, actually. I was living in Rome, Italy, and I flipped a coin. And I was going to say heads, I go to LA, or tails, I stay in Rome. And it came up tails, stay in Rome. And I thought, 2 out of 3. That's how I wound up here. Went to film school, and I live in Santa Monica, so I'm right on the edge of where all the terrible fires were. And one of my kids went up. Actually, both my kids went up to the Palisades yesterday. It just opened up. They spent their youth going up there, going to the great shops and hanging out with friends and all that stuff. And so it was very moving that the one place that we used to love to go to still exists and they could go there. So, but Los Angeles is, it is what you make it. I mean, I lived in San Francisco for a while, and it's hilarious because part of living in San Francisco is people talking about how much they hate LA. But I'll tell you this. I was telling my kids this story the other day. I was in San Francisco writing for a magazine, and I saw Martin Scorsese having dinner, and I stopped at his table and I said, I need your advice, sir, because I'm thinking of going into a career in the film business. He said, well, if you want to be in the theater, move to New York. But if you want to be in film, you should go to Los Angeles. And that was enough for me to hear, okay, I got to go. And ultimately, when I flipped that coin, I came back to the States and found that I had been accepted to USC Film School. I forgot that I had applied.
Wow.
Anyway, so I wound up at USC in the screenwriting program and professional writing program, and ended up. So I've been there ever since. And so I've written and directed like 9 theatrical feature films, none of which you've seen, Devin. However, none of which I have to hide from. But you can find them online.
Yeah.
You can find them on YouTube.
I just watched a clip of one of them, the You Can't Hurry Love one.
Hurry Love. Okay, pretty
Yeah.
wacky. That was a film. I made a short film with some friends of mine, and we showed it to the studio, and Vestron was called. And 6 months later, I was directing my first feature. And it's funny because that producer who produced that film has been after me to do a movie based on what we're going to talk about, which is accessing people's past lives, or accessing how consciousness works. And so he's been after me to do a story that's kind of like a comedy about that. But, you know, in essence, for your audience to get context, so basically when
I just ask you before you get into that, you had the guy from Beethoven and You Can't Hurry Love, and I forget his name, but he's been in he was in a bunch of 80s movies. Yeah, what was he like? Do you mind just telling us what he was?
I'll tell you about it through this way, which is, so I came out, I flipped the coin, I found out I got into SC, and I wound up in a screenwriting class with this actress who was assigned to a screenplay with me. Her name is Luana Anders. And we became close friends, started going out. We lived together for 20 years. And she was very close to Charles Grodin, the actor who was in Beethoven, starred in Beethoven. But he's a very private guy. And so I didn't meet him for a couple of years. You know, she would tell him about me and tell me about him. But, you know, it was that thing of privacy and not invading someone's space. But one day I ran into him in a restaurant with her, and he came by the table, and I said something to him like, "Are you eyeballing my plate? Because if you are, you can't have anything I'm eating." Okay. And so that started a conversation, which then Chuck and I became close friends. And when my friend Luana passed away in 1996, she started visiting me. And then at first I thought, I'm making this up, but then she started visiting friends of mine, and they would describe the same thing. And so then Chuck called me and said, "I want you to come and produce my show, Charles Grodin Show on CNBC, and, you know, do produce segments, comedy bits out in the streets of New York." So I did that. And at some point while doing that, I suggested we bring on a medium, guy named James Van Praagh. Some people have heard of him. I had seen him on CNN, and I said, or Larry King, I said, you know, this guy seems to, I said, maybe we can talk to Luana. So he brought him on the show. That clip is in the film Hacking the Afterlife, where Chuck invites James Van Praagh on, and Chuck and I worked this out so that I would call in. And nobody on the set knew I was going to call in, but Chuck did, you know, call this number, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, you know, let's see if he can talk to our friend Luana Anders, who had passed away the year before. And James Van Praagh said, "Oh, she's saying that you have a cocktail glass collection," my last name, which I do. She's laughing about that. And then she's saying, "There's a photograph on your refrigerator that's the essence of your relationship." Now, in that moment, I knew he had to be talking to somebody, because when I put the photograph of me and her in Rome together, laughing and having cappuccinos, I said aloud, "Oh, look, the essence of our relationship." I've never said that about any photograph in my life, but I did. So when he said that, I knew, oh my gosh, we're connected here. And it's, the clip is in the movie Hacking the Afterlife, which is on Amazon Prime or Gaia, where Chuck then looks at the camera and says, you know, everything you said is accurate. So Charles and I remained good friends. Now, it's interesting because when I went to make the movie You Can't Hurry Love for a studio $1 million picture, it made $10 million, but, you know, Vestron.
Oh, wow. That was in the 80s too, right? So that'd be, what, 20 million today or more?
Well, whatever. It didn't help my career because nobody knew about it, but whatever. That's what the producer told me. But anyway, the producer said, "Look, if you get some celebrities to do cameos in your film, we'll make it." And I went, okay, like who? Like Charles Grodin? He was like, yeah, get him. So I called up Chuck and I said, hey, listen, would you do a cameo for me in my film? And he was like, when is it? He said, I can't that day because I'm shooting another movie with Jim Belushi, Couch Trip. And I said, oh, okay. And I hung up and he called me back and he said, is this a favor? Is this something that will help you in your career? And I said, absolutely. He said, I'll be there. So he was shooting Couch Trip. And during his lunch hour, I had somebody pick him up, drive him to the set. The crew was standing by and waiting, plopped him in a chair, shot it in one take. Now that's what's in the film. And it's Chuck doing this hilarious bit of being a guy's going to a dating service, video dating service. And of course, the trick in LA is everybody in the dating service is lying about who they are, pretending they're somebody else, somebody bigger, better, whatever. And Chuck is playing the role of a date's father who warns him about the dangers of, sex without condoms.
Yeah. Okay. That explains it, because that's the clip that's online for anyone that wants to search it up.
Online. It's a cute, and he just did that as a favor. And now I might add, some years later, he called me up and asked me to come out and work on a show, like I said. And I said, I can't, I'm going to Cannes. I got to film, blah, blah, blah. And then I hung up the phone and I called him back. I said, is this a favor? Are you asking me for a favor? And he said, yeah, I am. I said, I'll be there tomorrow. So I said, I gave him 6 months of my life. And if you watch the old episodes of the Grodin Show, you'll see me on the show a few times. And then segments, Men on the Street, whatever. So Charles Grodin was probably the most loyal, charming, funny, witty person I've ever met in my life. My kid's godfather. And what I can say about him is that, of course, for us, terrible loss that he's no longer on the planet. But what a wonderful thing that every time I turn on Beethoven, I'm laughing. There he is. Or Midnight Run. There's a great line in Midnight Run where he says, I'll see you I'll see you in the next life, which he added to the movie because he improvised most of that role with Robert De Niro. So, now cut to, here I am. And so Luana, my friend who passed away, starts showing up in a very visceral way. And I thought, well, if she can show up and talk to me or appear in my dreams or to people I know, she must be somewhere. And so that's what prompted this research. And she'd been a Buddhist, so I thought, oh, maybe if I study Buddhism. So I went to Tibet with Robert Thurman. And what I found was that Buddhism is really peerless if you're going to talk about the nature of reality. But in terms of the afterlife, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is accurate up to a point, because the guy who wrote it had a near-death experience. It's just they didn't go further. That's the only way to put it. So I started doing this kind of research, and that led me to Michael Newton, a hypnotherapist in Los Angeles, who had done 7,000 examples of hypnotherapy over the course of I don't know how many years. And ultimately, he published a book called Journey of Souls. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is an interesting topic for a documentary. Now, I must tell you that as Luana was dying, she told me that she had this recurring dream that she was in another universe in a classroom with people talking about spirituality in a language she had never heard before, but somehow she completely understood. And when she told me that, I thought, oh, that's the morphine drip, that she's making that up. But then when she passed, a friend of hers called me and said, I had this wonderful dream. Luana was in the fourth dimension, she said, and she was in a classroom and everybody dressed in white and talking about things, spirituality. And I told that to her hospice care nurse, who nearly fainted, because she said that was her recurring dream. So I picked up Michael Newton's book, and I'm like chapter 1. There's a guy talking about being in a classroom in the afterlife, everybody dressed in white, talking about spiritual things. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is that's the key. That's the engine to get the car to drive over to see her. So I thought, a documentary. I'll make a documentary about this guy. And I called up the Newton Institute. They said, well, he's retired, but he's doing a workshop in Chicago. So I went to Chicago, my hometown, and I filmed Michael doing these sessions for a week. And then they suggested I do one. And at the time, I thought, oh, this is great. I can prove it to be fake, because you can't convince me to say something I don't see. I'm not going to make something up. You know, if I see nothing, I'll say I don't see anything. And I was prepared to say for 4 hours, I don't see a thing. And unfortunately, that's not what happened. And about, half an hour into it, I started to see like previous lifetime stuff that I then looked up and researched and did the forensic research and found all it to be accurate. That's the book Flip Side. And that started the journey that I'm on now, which is, occasionally I get to work in films. I worked on Philip Noyce's movie Salt, the Angelina Jolie, and I worked on the Amelia Earhart movie with Hilary Swank, and that behind the scenes stuff. But in terms of this research, and I was talking about this morning with somebody, which is, this idea of UFOs and UAPs and alien beings. If you have a premise about how things work, this is how data is and research is, the thing has to fit for everything. So if we're talking about how consciousness works, if you're talking about ghosts, or you're talking about people who departed, or you're talking about past lives, or you're talking about aliens, all of them have to fit within the context of whatever you're arguing for, you see? And in my case, I've visited the UVA Medical Lab Department of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, where they've been demonstrating that consciousness is not confined to the brain for the past, I don't know how many decades. Dr. Grayson's book After, Near-Death Experiences, Dr. Tucker's book Before about reincarnation cases, Dr. Kelly's work about consciousness being outside the brain. All of these guys are scientists, post-materialist science they call themselves, who are dealing with this topic. And what happens is, what it seems to be, Devin, is that when we incarnate, let's put it that way, it's the human brain has filters that block information. Why? Because the information is not conducive to survival. Dr. Helen Wambach wrote the same sentence in her book from 1978 or 9, Reliving Past Lives. She talked about filters on the brain that block awareness of what's really going on. Dr. Grayson, same sentence. I can even tell you, page 125 in his book After, same thing. We have filters that block our awareness of other dimensions. All right? Now, other dimensions, what are we talking about? Well, dogs can smell cancer. Bees can see UV light. Other dimensions, other frequencies that we can't. Birds change their mating habits months in advance of bad weather.
Dogs can smell cancer? I've never heard that before.
Smell cancer. Yeah, just Google that. They've done studies where dogs can smell cancer in a patient, where octopuses have 8 brains, and they can do more in 1 year of life than we can do in 80 years with one brain. Shape-shifting, color switching, masking, all those things that we can't do. Corn, and if you look up Dr. Galliano in Australia, she's been studying how plants talk to each other, and she's demonstrated how corn can summon insects to protect itself from adversaries. The idea that these frequencies that we're not aware of, they're happening all the time on our planet. We're just not focused on them. We do this thing of like, well, show it to me. Okay, I want to see it. Put it on a plate so I can discuss what it is. That's us. That's our limitation. We all know, we've all had pets that talk or see things that we can't see.
Oh, yeah.
And children. See, now here's the thing about filters. When some children come onto the planet and they don't have the filters until they're 8. And they'll tell you, I remember you from a previous, you were my father in another lifetime, or I was the father last time. Or, they see people that other people can't see. Grandpa's here, grandma, I see grandma. Of course, we kind of go, what? What are you talking about? However, conversely, as Dr. Grayson noted, elderly people lose their filters, something called terminal lucidity. And it's where people just prior to passing suddenly remember everything. It's 70% of the UK hospice care workers with dementia patients report their patients spontaneously recovering memory, as if, Grayson pointed out, as if the filters have died along with the brain dying. So what are the filters? And wouldn't it be cool if we could figure out how to flip that switch?
Right.
An example is in our podcast, Hacking the Afterlife, a couple of months ago, Jennifer Schaefer, who I work with, medium, works with law enforcement, she did a brain scan, MRI, and the doctor, you can hear her audibly gasp in the clip that she showed, because while she's doing a session, one half of her brain is quiet. The other half is lit up, as if she was asleep, as if she was in a deep meditation. It's because her filters are off. So when mediums talk about seeing and hearing and sensing and smelling and whatever, it's because their filters are askew. It's not because they're special or I'm gifted. I mean, you could say that, of course, whatever. When people have brain trauma, whether it's autism or whether it's people have dementia, I've interviewed people, their higher selves, while they're having dementia. So a friend of mine's father was in hospice care, and I interviewed him before he passed. And I said, so how much of your conscious energy is in your body? He said, 10%. 90% is already back home. I said, why haven't you left? He said, well, it's like leaving a leg in the pool. I'm waiting for my grandchildren to say goodbye to me. And once they did, he departed a few weeks later. So it's this idea, and it comes from this research, which is, if you look at all these people, they talk about the fact, and this is mind-bending, but that we exist prior to our incarnation, and that we map out or plan. It's not all in concrete. We like 3x5 cards, like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm all right. I guess I'm going to be a filmmaker. We plan our journeys with the help of guides and teachers based on what we've done before. And people could say, no, I don't want to work with him. He's a bad actor. He doesn't do what he says he's going to do. Or we go, I don't want to do that. Incarnation is optional. We can say, I know that people talk about karma. Karma in Sanskrit actually means action or energy. So people report we can choose to revisit stuff that we didn't pass in class. So if you had a hard time being, or the drug addiction, for example, you might say, oh, I'm going to choose a lifetime where I can conquer this because I can overcome that. And I'll show you. And you sign up for your lifetime and you get on stage, you're born, and then you don't conquer it. And everybody, all your friends backs. So you only bring a percentage of your conscious energy. And people say it's between 20 and 40%. Okay.
Maybe you could answer just one quick question related to that. I interviewed someone else about consciousness about a year ago.
Yeah.
And they said if you have a drug addiction on the other side, it can follow you, on this side, it could follow you to the other side. Do you think that's possible?
Well, I can just say based on the data and based on the research and based on the footage, they've got it backwards. They've got it upside down. Because off stage, everything associated with the brain is dropped. So addiction is associated with the brain. Boop, gone. It's a prop. It's a costume.
Okay. So it's a problem with the brain rather than the spirit.
That's right. And you get back home and your teacher goes, yeah, so that whole thing about being an addict and you're going to overcome it. That's so good. And sometimes people go, well, I didn't realize the drugs are so strong now. I mean, I was an addict back in the 1800s, but, it was laudanum. Drugs are much worse now. Anyway, we have this thing. We tend to think that everything we're doing on stage is so important and so fantastic and so valuable. But off stage, when we can look at 100 lifetimes simultaneously, we can go, not so much. You didn't do so good here. You're working on it. You can do better. So that idea of bringing a portion of our conscious energy is kind of, now here's, and to tie us together here with Close Encounters of the Flip Side Kind, the book that I've written for Contact in the Desert. Again, if the paradigm of what I'm talking about is accurate, then it should apply to these reports. So what I did in that book is I interviewed scientists who had been UFO researchers during their lifetime, but I interviewed them off stage. So for example, the scientist J. Allen Hynek, he's the guy who's responsible for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He was my science teacher when I was in, there it is. He was my science teacher when I was in grade school. My Catholic nun teacher assigned a friend of hers as my mentor for my science project, who was J. Allen Hynek. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that until I saw the movie. And I recognized my professor on the screen because they had a clip of him. Paul Hynek is also a scientist, and he is at Contact in the Desert. So I met him there, and I said, this is going to sound weird, but I knew your dad. He was like, that doesn't sound weird at all. So what I did was I did a guided meditation. Those are the three paradigms, or the three methodologies I work with. Hypnotherapy, 4 to 6 hour sessions with Newton Institute trained hypnotherapists because they know where they're going. Mediums, I work with mediums who work with law enforcement, so I know how effective they can be. And this guided meditation, which I do, I've learned how to do that, which is just picture yourself in a boat on a river, and then let's see where we can go. So I did that with Paul Hynek. It's in the book, Close Encounters of the Flip Side Kind. Is a transcript of it. And in it, I asked, could we talk to somebody that you would like to talk to? And he said, my father. So now I'm asking his father questions. Do you remember me? Oh, yeah, I remember you. He called me persnickety. I mean, it's not exactly a word that we use in our parlance. He said, you're persnickety and you ask too many questions.
Good password for people out there if they're looking for something unique.
But so then I took it to Jennifer. I took the same questions to Jennifer Schaefer, and I said, I'd like to talk to a guy named Jay Allen. She didn't know who I'm asking for. And he came forward. And I said, well, was this interview with your son accurate? Yeah, absolutely. I said, so what was your impression of me? And he said, persnickety. Jennifer's now saying the word. He's saying a word. I don't know. It's persnickety. The point being, you can ask people off stage questions and they can answer them through different people. Now, one of the most unusual parts of that interview with Paul Hynek was I asked him, his father, if he had met anybody that was interesting on the flip side. Okay. The construct is Paul and I are in a restaurant, Calabasas, and I'm asking his dad, who did you meet on the flip side since you crossed over that was interesting? And he said, Ben Franklin. And I said, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I mean, what was that like? He described it. And I said, this is how you can do it. Can we talk to Ben directly? He said, sure. Ben's here. Okay. And now I'm asking Ben Franklin, Devin, just the way you would ask me a question. But I asked Ben, what are you doing on the flip side? Are you teaching a class or taking a class? He said, he was teaching a class. And I said, what's it about? And he named what the class was about. Like it was ethics and morale, something. And I said, I don't know why I asked this question, but I said, have you ever kicked anybody out of your class? And he said, yeah, Ralph. Now, Paul laughed. I laughed. Yeah, I kicked out a guy named Ralph. You know, is he being funny? I don't know. And I said, why'd you kick him out? He said, it just, he was too many questions. It was just not the class for him. And he was too opinionated in the classroom. And so I asked him to leave. Okay. I'm done with the session. I go back and I look in my, history online and I look up Ben Franklin and I look up Ralph. Turns out, I forget his first name, but his last name is Ralph, like Frank Ralph or whatever his name is. he was his best friend, and the two of them traveled to London together. They had a falling out over a mistress, and Ralph wouldn't pay him the money he owed him. And then so when Franklin went back to the United States, Ralph stayed behind, and he became a writer for the English papers. He was so acerbic, so, knocking the English government. They paid him not to talk. They paid him not to write. They gave him a stipend. They said, if you don't write anything, we're going to pay you. So that's how annoying he was, that the British government would, paid him to shut up. And so now here was Ben Franklin saying, that's the only person I had to kick out of my class because he was too opinionated.
Wow.
Anyway, I told that to Paul Hynek afterwards because he didn't know that. He wasn't aware of that at all. And Paul was like pretty shocked about that. But let's go to the thing that I think is probably the most interesting for your audience. And, I hope it's been interesting so far.
Just one quick question here from an Australian guy. If hypnotism works for everyone, you're doing something different than hypnotism that might be maybe more effective
well,
to someone that
put it
could
this way. I'm the only guy Devin, who's been filming people under hypnosis for the past 15 years, right? So
Right.
Yeah, I've done 6 sessions myself, and I've filmed 200.
Okay, that's
so
a lot.
The question is, does it work for everybody? It depends on the hypnotherapist, and it depends on the person. Now, let's be clear what hypnosis means. Hypnosis means sleep study. That's all it means. When you do hypnosis, you're never unconscious. You would be asleep. You're conscious of what you're saying. And sometimes people, check themselves or feel like, oh, I'm making this up while they're talking. So it can be a problem, but whatever. The Newton Institute hypnotherapists that I've filmed, and I've filmed a bunch, they do 4 to 6 hours of a session. So if you're talking about hypnosis for an hour, you book the person for an hour, you really won't get very far. But if you're in a 4 to 6 hour session, you can get far. Dr. Helen Wambach, when she did her sessions, she did 8 hours. She did 4 2-hour sessions. And by the way, on the Hacking the Afterlife website, there is one of her sessions. Somebody that was in a session sent me a copy of her doing a session in Chicago back in the 70s. And so I just put it online. So anybody can do their own self-hypnosis session to see where they go. There's no pressure. You haven't had to go somewhere to somebody's office. No one's making you think of things. You can just do it on your own. And, she was the one who noted that hypnosis means sleep study. So you can study your awareness of what's going on. Anyway.
And you got another guy asking if you know how to play the X-Files theme on
my keyboard?
Yeah.
Let me think. I can play you the flip side theme because, of course, Devin's heard my podcast, and this fella should. But I wrote this piece. I wrote that for the film Flipside.
Oh, cool.
And initially, I wanted to get some Philip Glass type music. And I thought, well, that's just B minor and G. I mean, I could do that. So anyway, yeah, there you go. That's the flip
And
side.
actually, I'm going to check out your podcast. I've seen you on other podcasts.
Oh, but
I was not. Now I'm definitely going to watch your podcast because I want to see some of this in action.
Well, here's the cool thing. This is pretty cool. It helps to give context. So about 10 years ago, I got an email, Facebook invite from Jennifer Schaefer, a medium who works with law enforcement. And I was like, I don't even know what that is, mediumship. That's not my thing. And then, so she calls me up and we get on the phone. She lives in Manhattan Beach. And I said, it's not my thing. I go, what do you do? She says, well, I help find missing persons. And I went, oh, how'd you like to work in the most famous missing person case in history? And she went, I'm in. So I didn't tell her who it was, but I went over to her office and I put up my camera. And for 3 hours, I talked to somebody who knew as much about Amelia Earhart's disappearance as I do. And I've worked on her story and her film for 30 years. So let's put it this way. I know what happened to her. But Jennifer did. And so that was mind bending. And from that point forward, we just decided, well, let's just get together every week and see what we learn. Every week for 10 years, we meet. And for the past 4 years, we do the podcast. So that's why you'll see in the podcast, we can do like a half hour and just skip down. Somebody shows up. Luana Anders, the person I mentioned earlier, is the moderator of our group on the other side. She passed away in 1996. She plays Jennifer's role. She helps people who have crossed over to communicate, because we don't think of it that way. But in terms of communication, you have this thing of like, we think of sound as the only way to communicate. Well, over on the flip side, they might be projecting images, and Luana helps translate it to Jennifer, and then I ask questions. That's been our process.
She looks like she could be a movie star in one of your films. Very pretty.
Well, today I think she hasn't said what it is, but I think they're shooting some footage of her, and that she might be doing her own show and her own thing. And she promised that she would never not do our podcast, but I think she's going to be busy for the next couple of years, because I think they're going to yank her. She's worked with Bill Bratton, NYPD commissioner. She's worked with members of the FBI that I have interviewed to find out, like, what did she do for you, that sort of thing. But she's also worked with some family members. Steve Jobs' family allowed her to say that, and Kobe Bryant's family has allowed her to say that. She generally doesn't say who she's working with, but sometimes Steve Jobs shows up on our podcast. What I recommend people do is just go to the Hacking the Afterlife on YouTube podcast and do the search engine and pick a name of somebody you wondering whether or not they might have talked to us. If you look at this past week, was a friend of mine, my brother, friend of mine, and also my friend's Lois Tracy, who passed away a week ago, and I couldn't go to her funeral. So I thought, well, what better way to sort of honor her memory than to ask questions? You're looking at, there's Limit Up and Point of Betrayal, 2 feature films that I made, and I always wondered what they would look like in black and white. So I put them online. One is owned by MGM. The other one is, I don't know who owns it. It's just that weird thing that happens as a filmmaker. So there's the audio version, and then the physical version. And sometimes, and listen, there's no hierarchy on the flip side. So when somebody shows up who's a celebrity like Charles Grodin, that's a relative issue. They can answer the same questions that Devin has, about his family. And this is Simon Bone. Simon Bone has a podcast, Past Lives Podcast. And he interviewed me about this book. And this book was inspired by David Kirkpatrick, former president of Paramount Studios, who actually fired me from a movie.
So this is an audio book type thing?
That's an audio of the podcast. And what I did was I just put up some footage so that I could pop it on YouTube, NASA footage. But we're talking about outer space stuff. I got to say, there's a Simon Bone podcast that's listed on there where Simon reveals on air that he had been abducted as a child. And like I always do, I said, well, let's go to that moment. Let's freeze the frame. There's no emotions associated, but I want to talk to whoever is in the frame. And I said, can I talk to the pilot of this craft? And he said, they're saying yes. They're saying, we'll talk to you. And I asked the pilot, who looked like a classic gray alien, the big eyes, the gray skin. Yeah. I said, so what are you doing? Are you a tourist? Are you just swinging by and picking people up? And he said, no, this is somebody we've known since before he incarnated on the planet Earth. And I said, wait a second. Are you saying that you collect genetic material from people on the planet against their will? And he said, have you ever donated to the Red Cross? And I said, yeah. What does that have to do with anything? He said, these people agreed prior to incarnation to donate genetic material to help beings in other planets that have lost the ability to procreate. It's a donation. And I was like, wait a minute, are you sentient or not? And then it was funny because the being said, I don't know if I'm supposed to answer these questions or not. Like I had stepped on his toe, and I said,
Right.
oh no, I did the police thing, I said, no, I'm just confirming what I already know. So are you sentient? And he said, no, we are not sentient beings. We're artificial intelligence. We've been created by beings that allow us to go and accomplish. And I said, why are you coming off so cold to people? Because people, when they report, being abducted, it's always like there's nothing friendly about it.
Yeah.
And he said, this is how he answered the question. How effective would a hammer be if it had emotions? I said,
right.
It wouldn't be effective. He said, so we have enough sentience so that we can understand what's being said, and we try to be polite about it, but we have this mission to accomplish. I know this is mind-bending to hear, but it is what is consistently reported. We have filters on the brain that block this information, and clearly, in the case of abductions, like you don't want to know about it, right? You don't want to have to think about that.
Do you think abductions are one of the reasons why we don't have disclosure? Because the government might not necessarily want to reveal that.
Well, having been in the high, the movie Salt, I spent some time with the highest levels of government. They don't know. Listen, and this thing of people assume that somebody knows. They don't know. Not only do they not know, it's embarrassing for them to admit they don't know. And if you look at some of the panels at Contact in the Desert, you'll see, government agents talking about the fact that they were in the government and the guys in the government didn't know, or they didn't know what it was they were seeing or experiencing. And so we know that there are UFOs flying around, or UAPs. We know that. That's like a given. The question is, are they malevolent, or are they friends of ours? Are they tourists, or are they colleagues? And I'm just saying, in maybe the dozen more than that, people that I've interviewed who've had encounters, every one of them to date, doesn't mean it's always true, but everyone has said, I know these people. They know me. It's not random they came here. They've flown all the way across. Well, I'll put it this way. They travel in between dimensions. They know how to do that. So just like, UV light, and just like, birds knowing different dimensional stuff and dogs smelling cancer, you have this idea of different dimensions that we're not aware of that they can travel through. Now, why are they appearing and not appearing? What I've heard from asking these questions is nothing happens that we haven't allowed to be seen. And we do that because that is the progression of civilization, that eventually people start to realize how consciousness works. It's all telepathic communication. And that's the fun thing about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The two forms of communication they had come up with, which is based on the science that they tried, was music and light. Because what are those? Frequencies. So the idea was that you could communicate via scientific frequency, but they didn't think that maybe that their physics are different than ours. They can travel between dimensions. They don't need light and sound to hear. We don't need ears or eyes because it's all telepathic. Now, what do we do on a daily basis telepathically? We dream. Have you ever seen a lip move in a dream? Lips don't move. People are talking. We have no problem talking to people in dreams, but they ain't talking.
What do you think dreams are, by the way?
Well, here's the other weird thing is, I've had dreams where in the middle of the dream, I realize, oh, I'm in a dream, A. B, I've asked the person I'm talking to, are you an actor? And they admit that they are. That there's somebody, it could be off planet, could be on planet, could their higher self, playing the role of an actor to perform this duty, chasing you with a knife or driving the car. This happened to me actually in a dream where I was being chased by a group of people in Mexico City. I've been there, but a long time ago. I knew I was in Mexico City, and I got in a cab. Cab pulled up, and I drove away. And I thought, well, this is great. I'm being rescued. And I looked at the cab driver, and I said in Spanish, "Thank you for rescuing me." And he looked in the mirror and in a New York accent said, "No problem." And I went, "Wait a minute." I'm looking at him in the mirror, and I go, "Are you an actor?" And he goes, like, "Oh, busted." "Yeah, I'm an actor." I said, "Do you always play a taxi driver?" He said, "No, it's whatever role I'm being asked to play." We just don't understand how many, the myriad of things that are going on outside this stage, outside this planet, outside. So, and none of it's negative. All of that stuff where people throw the negativity stuff on, that all comes from the Earth experience. It's here we have good and evil. Off stage, it doesn't exist. That's what people report.
So where do aliens fit into it all? Are they in the same realm as us on the spirit side, or are they from somewhere totally different?
Well, think about this for a second. 35% of Newton Institute reports people remember lifetimes off planet. They've had 80,000 reports so far. In my research, I'm interviewing people. This is going back to Flipside, the first book. There's a guy who remembers normally incarnating on another planet. And he feels odd being here because he's not used to this. Now, the question is, why do you come to the planet? Why are you here? Why have you chosen to incarnate? In his case, he said, "I'm here to help humanity to shift so that it can drop the veil of not being able to communicate telepathically." That people, and so this is the other weird thing. We sleep for a third of our lives. Every day. You're not here for 8 hours. That doesn't mean your consciousness isn't doing something. You might be working. You might be helping tinker with whatever it is that needs to be tinkered with to help humanity to eventually, and now think of how that would change the planet if we realize our pets are fully aware and sentient. They know their lifetimes. They find us instead of us finding them. They report that often. I've heard it from animals saying humans don't understand how incarnation works, but animals do. Then when I talk to people in councils, Divine Councils in the Afterlife is my book where I had a bunch of scientists and clergy access their councils. Everyone has one. Sometimes they would see an alien on their council. And I would say to the alien, quote unquote, whatever, lizard or praying mantis, I'd say, "So have you ever incarnated on Earth?" And one of them said, "I wouldn't stoop so low." So think about that for a second. It's a guy who's saying it's too difficult here. So if that's the case, everyone you know and I know has had the courage to come here, no matter how difficult it is. We can handle it.
So it's interesting that you say that about animals, because a lot of people say the one thing that separates us from lower life forms is we actually know we have a timeline. So what evidence do you have?
Well, let's
showing that?
Let's get the nomenclature straight there. D, which is lower life forms. What does that mean? Think about that.
Well, ones that we can kill for food, for instance.
Okay, but think about that. We judge life forms on the size of their brain. What about the octopus? It's got 8 of them. So what people say on the flip side is that humans have this inability to see beyond their own sphere. There are no lower life forms. Life is life. And if you choose to, people don't choose to incarnate as animals because you'd have to let you into their clan. They choose, animals apparently, according to them, can choose to be any animal. They go off as a dog, come back as a horse. That's up to them. In our case, we only incarnate as humans, generally, for the most part. Rarely, sometimes something else. But again, sometimes people are remembering lifetimes off planet where they were not human. So then think about that. So it's the idea of animals are sentient, not only sentient, but capable of conversion. So conversation. The most graphic example I can give you is Robert Town, the guy who wrote Chinatown, my old boss. I was telling him we should do a session with Jennifer Schaefer, and we did it live on the air. It's in the movie Hacking the Afterlife. You can see the clip. And we did this three-way conversation, and at some point, Robert was kind of like a skeptic, and he was like, I don't know if I believe any of this. We talked to a mutual friend. And I said, well, why don't we try to talk to Hira? Now, Jennifer didn't know who Hira was. I did. I walked him for like years. Hira was this giant commodore. And Jennifer said, why am I seeing like a giant white shag rug? That was Hira. And Robert's like, what? And so now Hira starts telling Robert things that only he could know. Like the time when he challenged a buffalo on Catalina Island. Like the new house that Robert's living in and how he doesn't like him climbing up the stairs. Hira was never in that house. Jennifer and I have never been in that house. Robert realized that he was conversing with an animal that he had lost 30 years ago and was telling him things about his life now. And Hira has shown up so many times on the podcast. If you search Hira, you'll find multiple interviews with Hira who shows up and he wants to talk about animals on the flip side. It's mind-bending. And, again, not my opinion or theory or belief. I'm just reporting.
Why would any animal want to be a slaughterhouse pig, for instance, or a slaughterhouse cow? What benefit?
Yeah, exactly. And this is the difference between animals and humans. And this is the way they put it. We understand purpose. Humans don't. Think about it for a second. You're going to play 1,000 lifetimes as an animal. And don't forget, animals, they have like maybe a fifth of our days on the planet, right? Generally,
Yeah.
or half, or except for sharks that live 400 years or trees that live 5,000 years.
Yeah.
Why would they choose a different journey? People tend to just remember the last days of your life, whatever it is. You're a soldier, you're dying in war, you're somebody who's going to trip off stage. You forget that there's a whole portion of your life that might be wonderful. Now, in terms of, the way animals are treated on Earth, I mean, once you realize they're sentient, I can't imagine how anybody could put an animal in a cage their entire life.
Yeah.
I saw Babe, and I agreed with that concept. But that being said, I understand the question. I'm just saying animals will say, we understand purpose. That my purpose in that journey might be just to be food for that lion that's going to eat me. I'll tell you, one of the first times that I had these conversations, I was doing a guided meditation with a woman, and she was seeing a panther, a black panther out in the wild. It scared the heck out of her because she was always afraid of them. And so I just said, let's shift your consciousness over to the panther. And let me ask the panther questions, like, what's your journey? And the panther said that he had lifetimes as many different animals, and that each time there was a lesson to be learned. Each time there was some journey. And of course, humans have shown up and changed that paradigm for so many animals.
Yeah.
I had an interview. I had an interesting conversation with a tree, if you can imagine. And the tree, I asked the tree its opinion of humans. And the tree said, like insects, only more annoying. So, is that accurate? I don't know. All I can say is when you talk to...
I'm going to put that as a short. You had an interesting conversation with the tree.
That's true.
Yes, I know. I'm just saying, I understand that people don't think of it that way, that there's actually energy supposedly from plants and trees.
All I can say is it started when I was first doing a session with somebody, and they said, I'm in a sacred grove and I see these trees, and I thought, oh, go over there and touch the tree. And then when they did, they said, oh, I feel like there's a sentient being in the tree. And I was surprised. So I said, well, let's ask this sentient being a question. What do we do about climate change? And the woman said, the tree is responding and I'm hearing it. Plant 1 trillion trees. And I said, why? And the woman, who was not a scientist, said because then the oxygen level will increase and the climate temperature will decrease. It will balance the world out. Now, afterwards, I looked it up, and it estimated that before the industrial era, there were 4 trillion trees. Since the industrial era, a trillion are gone. So the tree was like giving me a statistic: plant 1 trillion trees. And if you look it up, you'll see that people are trying to do that. Why? I don't know. Are they getting a message from the trees? There's a tree named General Sherman that's in the Sequoia forest in California. And I went up last year to see General Sherman. I happened to be traveling with a couple of mediums. And I did this kind of weird independent thing where I just said, I'm going to ask General Sherman a bunch of questions. And then I took those questions back to Jennifer, to our podcast. So look up General Sherman in our podcast. And I asked, was this accurate? These answers. And what he said was, the frequency of the tree is unique to trees, and that every piece of wood anywhere on the planet shares that frequency. So when you ask a tree a question, you're asking all trees a question. That's what he was. I mean, it's mind-bending, but that's what he said.
There's a fan on here asking if you think there's a cure to all sickness somewhere on our planet, plants, trees, etc. I don't know if they're talking about tree sicknesses as well by saying that at the end.
Well, no, I understand the question. And it's like,
okay.
Is there a way that we can, put it this way? The planet Earth, and listen, I've talked to people who can recall, if as weird as this sounds, visiting Earth while it was forming. We have a tendency to think of years in our own frame of reference. 25 years on Earth, according to people off stage, feels like 5 or 10 minutes. So relatively, I've more than one person, I visited Earth while it was still forming. And some people talk about being in classrooms where they start other planets. They help seed other planets and other universes, stuff we can't conceptualize. So what is the Earth? Or what is it? What's our journey here? Certainly there's life and death in terms of the human animal. We get begin and end. There's, ash to ash, whatever, however that works. But that's the kind of agreement we make to come here. So now, are there cures for everything? I mean, that would mean, it goes back to what that alien said, I wouldn't stoop so low. Because humans have a tendency to transform their environment to fit themselves. And that might be related to their genetic code, which tells them they hoard everything, right? So I don't know. The point of what I'm talking about is that off stage, we're fine. Off stage, we're cured. There's no illness. When we choose to come on stage, there's a reason for it. We're not forced to, but we come here to experience the tactile sensations of wrestling, get in that crossface.
Yeah.
And, you could be in the audience watching a wrestling match, or you can be on the on the mat, getting your face pushed in. Some people like to do that. I wrestled in high school, and I did not like having my face pushed into the mat. But I'm just saying. So this is the thing. You can participate, and you can be part of it, or you can sort of sit back and watch it a little bit more. And what people say is you don't have to incarnate if you can talk your guides out of it. They're going to say, oh, you need to get in there, Devin. You got to get in there. You got to create this show. You got to help people. You're going to help. And Devin goes, whoa, hang on. I'm enjoying what I'm doing back here now. And everybody comes to him and goes, Devin, we need you, bro. And then finally go, all right, fine. How long do I have to be there? 100 years? Fine. You got me.
Can I ask you a quick question about wrestling from your standpoint as a director?
Yeah.
Now that it's pretty much completely scripted and it's considered more of a television show, and they call the wrestlers performers or talent.
Yeah.
Do you think they should be covered under the actors union? Because technically they're
well,
yeah.
I thought your question was going to go another way. Matthew Modine did make a really good wrestling movie back in the 1980s, a friend.
What was it called?
I can't remember the name of it. Some term, you know.
Grunt by any chance?
No, Matthew Modine. Just look him up.
Oh.
He's on Stranger Things and the wrestling movie. Well, listen, insurance. You go to Europe. I've spent a lot of time in different places of the world. Insurance is just not an issue anywhere but America. Everywhere else, you're covered, and so you're not thinking like, "Do I have to do this job to get my insurance?" To me, it's insanity that we pretend that the rest of the world is goofy and that we somehow have it, a better. So any way that you can get insurance, if you're a member of a guild or a union, but Screen Actors Guild, I'll tell you, I got 50 people into the Screen Actors Guild on my film Limit Up. And that's because they all came to Los Angeles and they worked as soybean traders. And none of them had been in the guild before. And when I got a call from the Screen Actors Guild, they said, you can't put these people in. We're going to fine you. I think it was $1,000 per actor for putting them in the guild. And I said, but no, you don't understand. Actors can't do the signs that they have in the Chicago Board of Trade. This is a skill. And thankfully, somebody who worked at the guild had been in the soybean pit in Chicago Board of Trade. And they said, yeah, he's right. So they didn't find me. So it's a good question, but I think more importantly is figure out how we can have insurance for everybody.
And something very interesting, you bring up Vision Quest, actually. That's one of my favorite movies. I'm randomly enough, I'm interviewing somebody from Vision Quest on Wednesday, the antagonist.
Oh, wow.
Huge. I'm wrestling.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's random that I'm actually interviewing a guy from that movie. What could you tell us about that?
There is nothing random.
Yeah, what could you tell us about
incidents doesn't exist. The more I research and the more I hear from people on the flip side, everything is connected and we just don't see it. But how wonderful for me to bring up somebody that's going to be a guest next week.
Yeah.
Why? Because it popped into my head and what the heck,
So last question here. I had a near-death experience a few years ago and I ended up just passing out and waking up a few days later from blood loss. Nothing at all, kind of hallucinations or
save
thoughts.
The best question for the last. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, like, if I had died in your theory, I guess some people have these near-death experiences, others, but what would have happened if I had died in your opinion?
Let me clarify that, Devin, which is you had a near-death experience, but you don't remember anything happening. You said, and you've been taught to say, nothing happened. No.
The last memory was I thought I was running out of water because but it ended up the doctors told me after because I was out of blood. I was thirstier than ever.
I understand, but just to be clear, you have no memory of what happened. It's not that nothing happened. Okay, so I'm just talking about the near-death research. So Dr. Grayson's book After really goes into it. You should take a look at it. 70% of people have near-death experiences remember something happening. 30% don't. So you're in the 30% group. Your filters are so strong, you're not aware of what happened. Okay? 85% of the 70% group experience seeing source or God, and they report feeling indescribable joy, unconditional love, and non-judgmental acceptance, which shows up all the time in my research. People having those experiences or talking to people on the other side saying, what's it like? Unconditional love everywhere or indescribable joy. It's consistent. So if we had a longer hour, if we had another hour, I could show you in a guided meditation how you can access what happened to you. I've done this many times. My brother had a near-death experience, just like yours. He was on, except different. I mean, he was in the army and he was doing training, basic training, and he got bit by an army of red ants and he died on the training field. And they got a helicopter and picked him up and they shot him with a shot of adrenaline and brought him back to life. But he had that experience of floating above his body and seeing down. And of course, he said to me, nothing happened. That was it. And I said, all right, well, let's examine it. So you examine the last thing, the water thing. You examine it, and you allow yourself to examine it and try not to judge whatever comes to mind. What I do with people in guided meditations, and you can find me at richardmartini.com. I do these guided meditations, about 90 minutes on Zoom. And what I do is I find a moment that you had, could be a dream, could be something like a near-death experience, could be anything that seems odd. And I focus on that moment, and I slice the time frame out of the moment, and then we examine it. And I have people talk to their guides. Everybody's got one. I have them talk to their teachers. We've all got them.
What is a guide?
A guide. What's your guide? So here's the thing. After you've lived your 1,000 lifetimes and you've solved every problem, whatever the number is, you graduate. So I asked a guide. I said, well, how did you become a guide? He said, I asked my guide, how'd you become a guide? He said, after all my lifetimes, I graduated, and my graduation gift was you. Meaning now he's been watching over all of my lifetime since then. But here's the cool thing. Guides don't just have one client. They can have more than one. It's a little bit like having an agent. It's a little annoying to find out that your agent represents other people. But what do? They keep an eye on you. You've signed up for stuff. And so you're having a hard time. You go to your guide. You go, wait, what's going on? Why am I having such a hard time? And your guide says, dude, you signed up for it. You created the class. So why'd you do that? You have to ask yourself why, or, let's say you're in a family you don't like, and you're having a hard time with the family you don't like, and you want to get away from the family you don't like. That's a great way to realize what you don't want your family to be like. So you choose the worst family to give you an example of what your family's going to be.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's about learning, and it's about allowing that the most difficult lessons in life, no matter what they are, can be something you can learn from, if not now, then in a future play, in a future performance. Oh, that's right. I've already gone through this illness. I know how to handle this. Whatever that might be.
So what is it you're going to be doing at Contact in the Desert coming up?
I'm going to be pulling in the aliens. No, I'm kidding. Actually, Jennifer Schaefer and I, we're going to do a session, an afternoon. We're going to talk about filters on the brain, and we're going to demonstrate and show some of her footage that she took of her, while she's doing a brain scan thing. And we'll talk to people in the audience and help them access people off stage. And then I will be talking about, my journey to this work, as well as talking to people off stage, like John Mack, who is a Harvard scientist who studied UFOs. And I asked him questions about his journey, J. Allen Hynek, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is, how can you talk to your loved ones off stage? You don't have to, but you can.
Very interesting. Well, maybe one day we'll have to have you back on if you're open to it, to do that with me, because I would like to explore that. And
I want to do that. I want you to meditate on it. In my meditation, it's in Divine Counsels, the Afterlife. Picture yourself in a boat on a river. Beatles song. Just put yourself in a boat. Great
song, by the way.
Great song. Put yourself in a boat. Picture the boat. Picture the river. And then ask for someone to come and sit across from you. And while they're there, then you start asking them questions about your journey, about their journey. And when you get an answer before you can ask the question, then you'll know you've made a connection.
So I really appreciate it again. I'll put your website up on the screen, and I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Devin. And I think it's important to remember, no matter how difficult the day seems, there is a chance that you can talk to people off stage. Harry Dean Stanton, who was an uber skeptic, we talked to him. It's in the movie Hacking the Afterlife. He said, tell people in the possibility that there is an afterlife, so then they don't waste another minute of their lives arguing about it like I did. Wise words.